the ACT TV viewers out there. My name is Heidi Sieck, and I'm the Chief Empowerment Officer of Vote Pro-Choice, and I'm so thankful for ACT TV for asking me to host this very important conversation about a very important race that's going to be on the ballot in New York City on June 22nd, and that is for the office of Comptroller. And today we are having a conversation with Brad Lander, who is a candidate for Comptroller. We're going to talk to him a little bit about what that race is all about and the importance of this role in city government. So Brad, please introduce yourself to all of the viewers at ACT TV and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Heidi, and hello, ACT TV viewers. In the world of reproductive rights, I think I'm rightly known best as the husband of Meg Barnett, a longtime champion of reproductive justice, a 10-year veteran at Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, whose endorsement I'm honored to have, along with Vote Pro-Choice and National Institute for Reproductive Health. Some people have gotten to know me as Rosa's dad, a policy nerd who tells corny dad jokes. But I've been fighting for New Yorkers for 25 years. I led 2 community development has helped to raise pay for workers, to protect tenants, to combat school segregation, to get air conditioners at every New York City school classroom. I've worked with Girls for Gender Equity to try to have more equity in our school dress codes. And I've fought hard to make city government work better so it can show up for all New Yorkers. I'm a proud progressive. I'm proud in this race to have the support of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren. But I know we have to make government work better. That's why I'm so proud to have the support of the New York Times and a lot of other people who know making government work better is the job of the controller and a perfect role for a progressive.
Well, thank you for that. Now let's talk a little bit more about what a comptroller does. So the viewers of ACT TV, a lot of New Yorkers, a lot of people from all across the country. So let's do a little civics education. What is this job and why is it so important and how it can impact the lives of all New Yorkers?
Thanks for this question and the opportunity, because definitely most people don't know, what the controller is or doesn't. You can say controller or comptroller. I go back and forth. I don't know how the really got in there. So the controller has 3 main tasks: budget watchdog, chief accountability officer, and long-term fiduciary, taking the long-term view on our city. As budget watchdog, that means making sure that the mayor and the city council have all the information to make good budget decisions and that we track every dollar. Right now, that means making sure that the $14 billion we're getting through the American Rescue Plan are spent wisely and effectively to help bring our city back, protect us from the pandemic, but also help get our small businesses open, protect tenants from eviction, get our schools open in the fall, create jobs, and promote a bold recovery that works for all our neighborhoods. As the chief accountability officer, the controller audits all city agencies to make sure they're delivering for New Yorkers. One agency I'll give an example that we need to look at is the Department of Corrections. We're now spending $447,000 per year to detain a person on Rikers pretrial, 20% more than a decade ago. Even though we incarcerate fewer than half as many people, that $447,000 should be spent on mental health care, on supportive housing, on things that would help people like Khalif Browder or Layleen Polanco, who died as a result of Department of Corrections custody. So that's Chief Accountability Officer. And finally, the controller is assigned to take the long-term view on our city. So much of our politics is short-term. The controller is the fiduciary for the city's 5 pension funds to make sure that teachers and nurses and firefighters have the retirement security that we've promised them. And that means managing the $250 billion in our pension funds wisely. But it also means taking the long-term view on our city. We didn't see the COVID crisis coming, and we are paying the cost in more than 30,000 lives. But we can all see the climate crisis coming, and the inequality crisis, the daycare crisis, the affordability crisis, they're already here. So the controller takes the long-term view to invest in our city and make sure it works better for all of us.
What an important job. It requires a lot of detail orientation and vision. How big is the city budget anyway?
So the year that we're ending in a couple of days, fiscal year 2021, we're going to spend over $100 billion for the first time. That's because we got a lot of relief money to deal with the pandemic. The budget that we're looking at for next year is proposed to be $98.6 billion, just like the temperature of a person. I don't know that that's what we wanted to match. But look, last year, we made devastating cuts to our budget. We cut summer youth jobs. We cut sanitation by over $100 million. We cut our parks by 14%. So thanks to the work that Vote Pro-Choice and so many people on this call did, winning the elections, electing Joe Biden, winning those elections in Georgia, we're getting American Rescue Plan money that is making it possible for us to secure a pandemic recovery that really does so much better to protect our young people, our small businesses, people facing eviction. And we need to make it a more equitable budget as well, because we've seen how this pandemic was most devastating for women, for Black and brown communities. And the big question is, will we show up for those communities to do right, not just go back to normal, but do something better?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's what I wanted to chat with you about. Your campaign talks about a just recovery for New York City, and you've mentioned that a little in what you just said. But let's talk a little bit more about what a just recovery really looks like, and why and how it's so important to have a progressive comptroller that are making the decisions that are going to impact this recovery.
Absolutely. I'll give you two examples. Last spring, as the pandemic was hitting, we would stand on our stoops or lean out our windows to cheer for essential workers. And we were cheering for those up in the hospitals and the healthcare settings, but also, cheering for essential workers in grocery stores. And the person who was most likely to, ride by and see our cheers were deliveristas, food delivery workers. They've been working all throughout the pandemic. They don't have minimum pay. They don't have paid sick leave. They don't have workplace protections. So a just recovery would say, okay, if those are essential workers, let's guarantee deliveristas and other gig workers, other essential workers, minimum pay. Let's guarantee them paid sick leave and health care, workplace protections, a lot of things that are within the power of the city and the city council to do, and we just haven't done. So as controller, I'm going to fight for that. One more example that I think finally is really getting attention is investing in daycare. So women during this pandemic were forced to, in many cases, keep doing their jobs and yet also bear a totally unequal burden of the pandemic schooling, of the pandemic childcare, because we have not built out an infrastructure that supports and makes gender equity possible. So on the other side of this, we have a clear opportunity to invest in the expansion of childcare and other things that will make it possible for us to move toward gender equity. Obviously, that includes continuing to invest in reproductive care and reproductive justice. There are a lot of things we could do, and a just recovery sees the inequalities that were there before the pandemic, but that the pandemic exposed and made worse. A just recovery says we are going to do better on them on the other side.
I am so glad you talked about these issues and the equity issues, because that's what I want to talk about personally. I'm taking facilitator privilege here. We're going to talk a little bit about reproductive freedom, and lots of people will often say, why are you getting involved in these down ballot races and these city government races? And that's what I want to ask you about. So, Joe Biden's federal budget just recently removed the Hyde Amendment, which removes this harmful, inequitable, decades-long ban on abortion funding. And we all know that abortion is essential health care. And then New York City in 2019 became the first city in the United States to directly fund abortion services, in large part because of the work of the Comptroller's office. So if you're elected, can we really depend on you to continue to support reproductive access, reproductive freedom, and particularly if the legal protections of Roe v. Wade are overturned in June, which is likely because of this terrible Supreme Court next June, will New York City continue to offer accessible care to folks seeking abortions? And how can we depend on you for this?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I'm sorry that you have to ask it. I'm sorry we're facing a period of time when we can't count on a Supreme Court, even though a majority of Americans support reproductive health care, that we're not going to be able to count on the Supreme Court to protect it. You could count on me 100% because it's the right thing to do, because of my track record, and because Meg and Rosa are going to make sure that I'm there every single day. I was proud in the City Council to be one of the co-sponsors of the effort to win the first public funding for abortion care. back in 2019. I relied on the report that Scott Stringer in the Comptroller's office had done to justify it, and I will continue to do research in the Comptroller's office that makes clear abortion care is health care, that it makes sense economically for our city, as well as expanding the opportunities, rights, and dignity for women. One other thing I'm committed to do is to join the Reproductive Health Investors Alliance. I mentioned those $250 billion, in our pension funds. There's an investors alliance called the Reproductive Health Investors Alliance, where investors, both public sector and private sector, team up and say to the companies we invest in that you have to provide abortion care as health care, look at gender equity. There's a broader set of issues of making sure women are being paid fairly, that there's not a penalty for taking time off for child care. So there's a lot we can do to invest in gender equity through the Comptroller's office. And then, yes, on your final question, if Roe is overturned and there are states where people don't have access to safe, legal, accessible, affordable abortion care, then New York is going to have to be a beacon. I'm particularly proud of the work that that Meg did opening up the Planned Parenthood Center in Queens, the Diana O'Mac Center, which is not a far ride from LaGuardia Airport. And in some ways, it was planned to be there so that if necessary, women who have to come here to get abortion care can have the ability to do it. And New York will need to show up and make that possible. That's a tragedy that we should do everything we possibly can to prevent. But if it happens, that I will be there out in the streets as necessary, protesting as necessary, but also doing the economic research to show why it's a good idea to make sure that we invest our money where our values are.
I really appreciate that answer. Obviously, it is critical that every single elected office focuses on how to protect reproductive freedom, and it's clear that you have given a lot of thought on that, and I do really always appreciate your partnership. We have time for one question that came from the audience, and this is related to some of the conversations we had before, but you've said that you'll move funds to the communities where they are most needed. So what are those communities and what are those needs?
Yeah. And let's be clear, I should be clear that the Comptroller invests the pension funds, but the city budget, you are a watchdog on. The mayor and the council members make the decisions, but before they pass them, you say, here's urgent things you're not paying attention to, and after, you make sure it's distributed as it's supposed to be. I mentioned to you, I'm just coming here from Corona Plaza in Queens, where we're with a group of immigrant advocates through the New York Immigration Coalition, pushing to win municipal voting rights for non-citizens in New York City. 1 million green card holders and TPS holders. Corona, Elmhurst were the epicenter of this pandemic, were the place where it hit first and hardest. So we need to look at the communities where COVID rates are high. And some of that is geographic, as we just talked about, but some of that is other kinds of communities as well. If we see the ways that gender inequity were amplified by the pandemic, then an appropriate use of budget justice means taking an equity lens to our budget and making sure, the reason that we're saying it's appropriate to expand and invest in childcare is because we must build a more equitable economy. If we're going to be honest to what we said about a just recovery, then we need a controller who pays attention to the budget with that equity lens and make sure to invest in communities that were hit the hardest. I got the endorsement yesterday from Congress member Ayanna Pressley, who I really think is like the best at this, talking about the ways in which the people closest to the pain have to be closest to the solutions. And I'm committed as controller to use the tools of the office in partnership with communities, definitely including the reproductive freedom community, with immigrant communities, with those hit hardest by COVID, so we can build a more just and inclusive city out of this crisis than the one we had.
Well, congratulations on that endorsement. That is definitely one to be proud of. You've had some great endorsements with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and now Ayanna Pressley. That's great. So as we wrap up, let's talk about the specifics of this election. We have our municipal primary on June 22nd. People are voting early now. So all those New Yorkers, you got to get out and vote.
There's no line. So if you go today, tomorrow, Saturday, or Sunday, you can vote in and out in 5 minutes at your early voting poll site. Go to vote.nyc and you can find your early voting poll site, or the polls are open 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Tuesday, Election Day, June 22nd.
And this is a ranked choice endorsement, which means that voters can rank up to 5 choices on the ballot So is there anything else you want to tell all of the listeners and the viewers of ACT TV and all of our partners about this race before we close?
Thank you. So on ranked choice, I'll just urge people to rank your preferences. Don't worry too much about all these questions of strategy. You know, if you've got a race in which you have preferences, I like that person first, that person second, that person third, great. If you don't like 4 or 5 people, you don't have to rank for every office. But I really hope people will go out and vote, because if you care about a just recovery, if you care about a more equal city, if you care about reproductive freedom, if you care about gender equity, they are all on the ballot. And it matters who our next mayor is, who your next city council member is, who your next controller is. I'd love to win your vote and have you join AOC and Elizabeth Warren and Ayanna Pressley and the New York Times in supporting me. But whoever you support, go out and vote.
Thank you, Brad. I really appreciated this conversation. And again, New Yorkers, remember, June 22nd is Election Day, early voting starting now. This is a ranked choice vote. It's the first time New Yorkers will be ranking, so use your vote and rank. And also, just a side note, Vote Pro Choice has done a full slate of New York City endorsements at voteprochoice.us under voter guides, or you can also go to votechoice.co/New York City-2021. That's impossible to remember, but that will be in all of the links that are going to be available to you when you watch this live stream. So Brad Lander, running for controller, thank you for this conversation today, and good luck out there. We'll see you all on Election Day, June 22nd.
Thank you so much, Heidi.